Plants, the green frontier. These are the discussions of the podcast Horticult. Its continuing mission: to talk about strange new cultivars, to seek out new flowers and plant them, to boldly garden like no one has before. Hey, this is Blaine from the Horticult. What's up, everybody? So, this is episode 52, Backyard Greenhouses. We get into greenhouse structures, using glass or polycarbonate or polyethylene, different kinds of greenhouses you can use, from regular, what we call greenhouses or glass houses, cold frames, to high tunnels to low tunnels, season extenders, small scale. We actually go over large scale because this is what Brad does. He works at a greenhouse, a commercial greenhouse. So we go over the large scale and how you can cut it back down and what's the cheapest way to do it. Small scale. Let's get it on. Well, this is Blaine.
And this is Bradical.
And we are the Horticult. And so are you. Thank you for coming along. Yep, Podlings, we're doing this thing.
Thank you and bless you for all of your help.
Spiritu Santo.
La benedición.
All right, so this episode, we're going to go on the idea of, we're just going to talk about greenhouses, the different kind of forms, I guess you could say, that they come in. So greenhouses, cold frames, high tunnels, the differences of them, and kind of what I'm thinking about. We'll just start with greenhouses. Or we can work our way up to like the most minimalist to the high. We'll just go to the highest.
Well, and maybe what the advantages are to some one structure versus another.
Yeah, and the cost is definitely higher for permanent structures. So that's what I kind of want to go into. Like in a greenhouse, when I think about it, I think of a permanent structure that is like foundation-y and has all this stuff. Mm-hmm. If you think about, like, in Europe, they don't even call them greenhouses, they call them glass houses, because that's what they used to use. They used to use glass. Now, there are very high benefits to glass, and there are very high negatives to glass. The high benefit would be clarity. So it's like really, really great sun.
Yeah, the good light intensity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The negative is they're really expensive, they're really heavy, they break, and it doesn't really make up the cost if you're doing it in a commercial environment to have a greenhouse. Mm-hmm. Glass just doesn't, it's not worth it. The extra cost for what you get. You can get the same results out of plants with less light intensity.
Well, and so a little bit of experience that I have, this greenhouse range that I work at currently, we have one giant gutter-connected range, meaning house connected to house connected to house.
Right.
And 8 of the 10 houses are polycarbonate, right? Or polyethylene, both actually.
So polycarbonate is like a rigid plastic.
That's right. So where light can still transmit through it. I think most of the light rays, but it does deflect some. I'm not sure exactly the exact details there. However, we do have 2 of those houses that are glass.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know
and
that.
So right in the middle they're glass, and so we can manipulate what crops are under glass, true glass, versus what's under the polycarbonate, and we can see the difference, the clarity and the difference. The 2 things that I notice is the plants that are grown under glass, if it's the right type of crop that really want high light levels, they always turn out better. They always flower better. They flower sooner, quicker, and the plants are just more vigorous. As you can imagine, when they're grown in the other environment, there's a little bit more competition for light, so they stretch just a little bit. It's marginal, okay? So it's not huge. But the transfer of heat is much, much higher in the glass houses. And so you really need to think about crops that can handle and tolerate higher levels of heat, right?
Well, that's the one thing I was going to bring up too, is in a glass house, because it lets in more heat inside, it also lets out more heat quicker. So like the polycarbonate ones can retain a little bit more of the heat when the sun goes down. They're double-walled. Yeah,
yep.
Double or triple-walled. They're single. So
there's more insulation factor with the polycarbonate.
Yeah. So that could be a factor in having to heat a house.
True that.
So if you have to heat it, that's another cost. There are ways to get around it. Like if you have your own little greenhouse, that's kind of, I mean, I want to talk about the industrial side, but I want to kind of bring in the residential side.
Definitely.
And how you can kind of mitigate those costs of heating and cooling. And there's little tricks you could use, rocks in your greenhouse that will heat up, and they'll retain that heat and hold it a little longer. I mean, we're not talking like a ton.
No, just enough to help offset the...
There was another thing, you could use rain barrels or barrels and fill them up with water, and those will also have a retention factor.
Oh, no way. Like, insulated, so they'll solarize, right, during the day.
Right, yep. They'll
and
warm
then
up.
In the nighttime, they
slow
insulate it.
Release their heat.
Cool.
And so it stays warmer longer. I mean, in the dead of winter, it's not going to make that huge bit of difference. You're going to need some way to heat it. So most likely on a small scale, if you get like these little kits, it's going to be polycarbonate or polyethylene. Mm-hmm. Most likely polycarbonate, because in the kit or whatever, you can screw it in and it's like this aluminum little frame, and they screw in the polycarbonate, and then you got your little greenhouse. So one of the main difference for me to think about a cold frame to a greenhouse is the structure.
Yeah.
So it's an actual, like, there's different kinds of structures of greenhouse. Like you were just saying, it was a gutter-connected greenhouse. Mm-hmm. So it has a very steep pitch, and on the way down pitch, you have another building that are connected.
That's
so
right.
It's one big giant room. It's like a freaking warehouse of plants.
Yeah.
And then with a cold frame, you could still have a heating element. Oh, that's the other thing I should talk about. So in a greenhouse, you have heat. What do you have at your greenhouse?
They're gas heaters, basically. They're up in the air.
Is that the only? Oh, so it's in and it rotates or whatever.
It doesn't rotate, but we do have HAF fans that then help circulate that heat. So the heaters will blow out. It's a lot like just a house heater, but just ginormous.
So each one of those runs on gas?
Yeah, they run on gas, and there are, let me think here real quick, there's probably 12 of those unit heaters per zone, per acre. So there's 12 heaters per acre. So you can imagine the amount of heat that it takes, the space, the growing space, on that commercial scale.
Do you guys use ground heaters too? Like any sort of...
we don't, but kind of we do. So in the propagation zones, we do have bottom heat for propagating. Now, you do that so that you can have more success and higher rates of success in propagation, but it absolutely helps heat the greenhouse because it's bottom. They call it bottom heat. It's under the concrete. It's under the floors, and it just slowly radiates up from the floor. And I would say like maybe the first 5 feet up off of the ground benefits from that heat.
Yeah, so that was one I thought too. That's a way that you could almost like what they do in construction builds with cold little areas, or like you have hardwood floors or tile or whatever, and they have those like radiant heat floors or whatever.
Yeah. Oh man, if you did that with your little greenhouse out back, that would be awesome.
And they do have those little, like, small units that you use for propagating.
Mm-hmm.
But
Heat
I've never
mats.
seen one. Yeah, I've never seen a huge one for, like, a huge, big greenhouse. Anyway, so, yeah, heating is an issue. So you got to think, if it heats up that fast when it hits sun, it's going to cool down, too. So that's something you got to think about. It's like a car. You got to think of it like a car, and you're getting out of church. No, I'm just thinking like when as a kid, like we have 3-hour church, right? So it's like
2 hours now, buddy.
Oh yeah. Well, when I was a kid,
All right.
and I get out of church, and you open that freaking car door to get, because you want to get home, right? There's like food waiting for you. You've haven't eaten since
You've been
the
starved.
day before because you're fasting. It's fast Sunday, and you're like, let me the frick out of here. You open up that door, and the heat just radiates out, and you're like, I'm going to sit in here and die of heat because I want to go. As soon as you can get those things going, it just cools off if you park. I mean, that's why people want to park in the shade.
Oh, and under trees, right?
Right.
Okay.
It's just that amount of sunlight hitting your car is acting like a greenhouse. So if it heats up that fast, and how cold is it in the winter when you get in it at first? I mean, it's freaking butt cold. It's the exact same thing for a greenhouse. It heats up that fast, it cools down that fast. So think about that when you're like, oh, I want to have tomatoes year round.
Yeah. Yeah, now you're making me reconsider my thought about that.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'll go on to the cold frame stuff. So
Okay.
cold frame is typically more of a hoop house. That's what the other term is it for.
Okay.
And instead of using polycarbonate, they use polyethylene. That you have one layer inside and one layer on the outside.
Yeah.
Or are they two? And you blow it
No.
up with like a little
fan.
boom,
Yeah.
and it creates that.
And it's just plastic. Polyethylene plastic. It's just two pieces of very durable plastic.
And it's roll out plastic, like you just roll out a big old carpet on top of your hoop house.
Exactly. That versus your greenhouse structure is that they're a lot more mobile. You could set it up, grow crops for 3 years, and then be like, oh, dude, we're moving. Okay, well, let's tear this thing down and take it with us. And I mean, that would be an option, right? It's a lot more. You're more likely to be able to just take it with you.
There's a lot less cost. So like a big old greenhouse for, say, the same square footage of a hoop house, and you could say a hoop house is what, 30 by 80. So, and then like if you did a greenhouse the exact same size, it would probably cost you about $50,000 to do a greenhouse. If you did a hoop house, it would probably cost you like what, 8, 10?
1,000.
Oh, 1,000? I was way off. So $1,000 to $50,000, but it's a permanent structure to a non-permanent structure. Don't have lights, or do you have in a cold frame? You wouldn't
No,
have
cold
lights.
frame you wouldn't, unless you're growing specific crops like ranunculus or mums or snapdragon. If you're not growing those crops, then you may as well simply just skip the lights, because that's additional cost, and grow crops that will work without that, which there's many crops that you can do. Obviously perennials. They do very well in a hoop house, and even an unheated hoop house. Perennials do very well. Cold crops, so vegetables, things like kale and cabbage and spinach and radishes and all of those cold crop type vegetables. If you're into that sort of thing, love that stuff.
You can still have heat though.
You totally could, yeah, and I would put if I had a cold frame, I would put a heater in there, but I wouldn't go, oh, I have to heat this to 72 degrees. You know what I'm saying?
Just have it above freezing.
Exactly.
That's great.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
But the difference that I kind of thought of from a cold frame to a high tunnel was you're still in pots in cold frames and greenhouses. Like you don't plant, like you have tables, you put it on the ground, you do you're moving them out to do other stuff, you're moving them in or whatever. In a high tunnel, it is in the ground. It is a crop that has been planted, and you are covering it to heat it above a certain, to keep it above freezing or whatever. So it lengthens. Like I saw a study for strawberries, the difference that they use for